What is up, down, and sideways, you glorious individuals? It is another FPF League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you, and I'll tell you, we got the spiciest, the biggest of fluctuating global power rankings that we've had to date in 2025, and it's not close. This was a busy weekend.
This was a serious one going around. All the major regions had the big actions, had some finales to some of these playoff pushes towards our first new international event that we will have this time around. And in the LPL, we've got some big time movers, some big droppers, some big shakeups happening. Important time to check in on that global power rankings.
Especially the opposite of early on when we were doing these, and you had a team playing maybe one series, maybe didn't even play that week, and then you got these LPL teams knocking out 3 best of 5s in a single week. So yes, it has huge implications on who's climbing and who's falling this weekend. We begin in that 20-11 board. Want to jump right to one of the squads that will be representing at this first international event. And no, Talon is not on the list anymore. It's the familiar name of the Flying Oysters coming in. Some new on this squad, but guys like Doggo and Kaiwing in the bot lane and Jinjia in the jungle, they were kind of towing head-to-head against Talon throughout this entire split.
And Jinjia is the guy that I want to focus in on. I think that he has been phenomenal this split for the team and really been one of these ones that has elevated not just his gameplay, but again, one of the things a jungler especially can do, elevate everybody's gameplay, having that effect, getting across the map, making sure that all these things are going right, helping out your boy Doggo down in the bottom lane, having a bit of a resurgence himself with this Flying Oysters team and getting success in the LCP.
And not even went through winners the whole way, never got down to losers, and again, they lost essentially a tiebreak, had the same 6-1 record pre-playoffs with Talon, so absolutely they were kind of the 1B to the 1A that was Talon in that push, and as I mentioned, very familiar faces that we will be seeing at an international event. They run the LCP so far early on, at least. A couple of EU squads. Koi comes back onto this list after a dominant series to keep their push alive, and K-Corp gets bumped down a few pegs. Yeah, they got a win against G2, but the way that they lost, not just pick ban in those 3 losses, but you have Broken Blades Poppy and Cho'Gath chasing guys into their nexus to get them down. They were not close in these 3 losses.
I think the biggest problem for a lot of people is that even with the performance issues that you can certainly pay attention to, the draft issues were even worse, more egregious, and more costly for this team in the long run when you really figure out how things were going to play out through that day. You had no chance straight from the get-go with a lot of these draft situations. That's a concerning thing for this K-Corp team. That needs to be addressed and fixed and worked around and strategized for, because there is a lot of talent here still with this team that can continue to grow, can continue to shine in the LEC. But if you're going to be coming to a series prepared for against a team, an organization like G2 in that type of fashion, that's not simply going to be good enough.
And again, they'll have a shot at redemption and feel like they absolutely have an avenue and chance against Fanatic, Koi, whoever it ends up being in that semifinal matchup for them. The most unlikely of the 4 LTA teams was Team Liquid to be the one coming through, winning finals, back-to-back series. And I know there's all the talk about Spawn delivering his speech to the team. We saw him do it last year at Worlds. I'm sure it was similar this year, but this was the ultimate blue shell. And not only was it a blue shell, but this was like all 3 other teams were bunched up in the same corner turning and got crushed by this blue shell. But I think the biggest thing from this weekend, especially in those FlyQuest and Cloud9 losses in semifinals, these needed to be best of 5s, because I can absolutely see an angle where C9 and FlyQuest win a best of 5 in those matchups.
Yes, that's a big concern, and I think a very valid one for a lot of LCS LTA fans that are caught in this crossfire now of having Team Liquid be that representative, and not necessarily a representative that anyone's disappointed or not having any full faith in what they can do. But there are question marks that still haven't really been validated. You can't put that unquestioned stamp on it as far as sending them off as your region's champion to this event. That's part of the problem with this for Team Liquid. I think one of the things that isn't a problem for Team Liquid is Jan's performance down in the bottom lane, the strides that he is continuing to take in his career to assert himself at the very top of the ADCs, of the LTA, of the North American region, and very clearly did so this weekend with his jobs for Team Liquid.
And, say what you will, we've harped on the format quite a bit. You could say the South versus North wasn't that competitive. Maybe Team Liquid is a little shaky still going internationally, even though they leveled up big time. But going forward, when we do get to April, when Split 2 is rolling around, as the format gets figured out, and I think the later splits do on paper have a better format, even though we're going to get some best of ones thrown in there. It feels like you have 4 teams that have a legit chance at being a world's level team in the LTA, and it feels like it's been a long time since we said that.
The competition at the very top of the LTA should be very intense, with a lot of these teams gunning for that same type of aspiration, same type of opportunities, hopes, all these type of things coming through with it. The one note I want to make sure that we're, hitting on Team Liquid before we move on is that I think Spawn, as a coach, right on that outside, is that little bit of an X factor for this team. And you saw that this weekend. It's not just completely X's and O's strategies. Sometimes it's the Jimmies and the Joes. Sometimes it's the motivational talk that someone like Spawn can deliver and really get your team fired up, get your team believing in themselves, even if nobody else in that arena is believing in them. And I think that is something surely in your corner, in your back pocket, that can help. Is it enough to help when you're staring down the titans of the LCK and the LPL to make up that difference? Probably not, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And I want to give a quick shout out to Spawn and Team Liquid for that one.
Yeah, and we've seen the behind the scenes of him speaking to the players, and some people might think it comes across as harsh, but this is what coaching is, and he's doing it out of the best for these guys. It's the verbal equivalent of a smack across the face, right? To wake you up, say, wake up, shake them, and yeah, it worked at Worlds, and it obviously has worked in this push. Sandwiched between a bunch of all these NA squads is Fnatic, who drop a couple of spots despite winning the series. I think most people watch that Game 3 against BDS and you say, yeah, Fnatic had no business winning this game.
It's kind of unfortunate that it's Fnatic in this type of label, because replace it, Fnatic, BDS, whatever here, whoever was coming out of that game was certainly not really gaining any points from it, is the situation we're left with in the LEC. Very, very sloppy. Sloppy almost sounds too generous, actually, for the quality that it was in that series between these two. And that is exactly why I think taking a little bit of a hit as far as where our confidence was on far as the improvements that have been made for Fnatic and where they can get to within this early split before our first strike event.
And this feels like Fnatic of old, even just last year, not that old. Where
that's the big problem is you're getting reminded of Fnatic of old, and you're doubting any of the progress, any of the positive stuff that you saw this split.
Yeah, we had the consistency in that 8-1 start, but now you're seeing these crazy gold graphs that they often show. Fnatic is that down and up, and depending on the day, what level they're at. Unless it's G2, then we just know they'll be at their worst. That seems to be how history has gone for this era of Fnatic.
And I think one of the things that you're seeing with this team, struggling right now is some of those problems that you've seen in the past, and that extends to the steady, stable performers of this team in Razork and Humanoid, not having the performances that that they need to be at that elevated level and can be at for this Fnatic team. And I think the other thing that I want to mention on with them is the bottom lane. I've been not necessarily as impressed with them as a package, as upset individually in that lane. And I think that's part of just taking that step back, resetting, refocusing, and reorganizing themselves and how that structure of communication and what their strategies are.
And I mean, They didn't look happy after that series win. I think even Oscar kind of had his hand like this, but
they shouldn't look happy.
They're happy to still be alive in the tournament and pushing towards that first championship under their belt in 2025. Obviously, crazy movement in that 20-11 board, but the biggest jumps, rises, and falls are in this 10-6 zone. And first and foremost, you see NIP climbs up, but they lost. But that's mainly because the NA squads, even with the win, were you confident to put Team Liquid top 10? Maybe not. So that's more the realignment for NIP. But then you get to the big drop here, and that is D plus Kia, because unfortunately, they dropped the biggest dud of the season in their most important series of the year. It seems like they just lost all their sense of how to play around the map and what objectives to prioritize against Gen G. They were just flipping everything.
Oh man, this one hurts a lot because I think it's one of those losses and one of those performances that looks so bad and was at such a crucial time that it can negate, it can throw away for a lot of people's minds the positive things that we saw from D plus Kia, this split, the steps, the strides that they take as an organization, as a group of 5, on where they stand within that structure, that hierarchy of the ultra competitive LCK. They accomplished a lot of things. They moved up a lot of places. They really did establish that they are going to be a player, someone to consider, someone that does need to be factored in when you're strategizing and talking about these later rounds of the LCK playoffs. No matter, first split, second split, third split, they should be there. But this falter at the most important time is going to sting for a lot of people, especially in the fashion that it happened against Gen G.
And they're still, a world's contender team in the LCK, of course. But yeah, that series kind of booted them out of that, championship status into the contender status, where we've kind of seen them hang out for the last year and a half or so. But still, the ceiling is there for this team, and I'm hoping they bounce back once these splits do roll around again for the LCK. G2 doesn't go up or down. They stay rock solid in this is like their favorite chair that they have at home, is that 8 spot. They seem to always find themselves kind of peaking around here. Obviously, they were incredibly dominant against KC, but hard to push them higher, especially when some of these drafts for K-Corp were a bit egregious.
Yeah, not really going to get much of a benefit in that situation for G2, but I think this is more so a reestablishing, finding themselves back in that position of the LEC's top seat of the team, in that driver's seat, moving of the Europe region, and really being that bar, that standard that you need to clear in order to prove that you are one of these real challengers, real contenders at the top level. What you saw from them this weekend, I think, was one of the best parts of it, is that fearless draft, is talking about that flexibility, that, champion identity that you can roll through with this team. That's going to be a factor at this first strike event if it is G2 representing the LEC, and that can be a card in their pocket. They have more familiarity or more things available to them. And again, it comes back to what we talk about with fearless draft, not necessarily just the unique champion, but it's about coming through with an actual cohesive composition around these unique champions and being able to utilize that and having a strategy for that. And I think the wicked minds at G2 are some of the best that we could have prepared for it.
Yeah, and as much as we harp on the KC drafting, G2 has shown that they have a lot of tricks up their sleeves in this fearless draft, and even Dylan Falco was saying he was some of the best drafting he's seen. To pat himself on the back there after the performance against K-Corp. Let me tell you, it is incredibly rare that we have a team climb up 10 spots in a single week, but the path to get there is, well, in a 4-day span. Yes, 4 days. We saw top Esports topple IG, NIP, and the massive upset against Billy Gaming. 3 best of 5s in 4 days, and they still had the mental prowess to come back from a 10K deficit against BLG.
Nobody does it like the LPL. Rapid fire time in the playoffs for this region. And yes, it is top Esports cashing in. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. One more ka-ching for the team as they take down BLG. And yes, you said it, in a very crazy game 3, including that 10K comeback performance. This is the top esports that a lot of people wanted to talk about, wanted to be excited about this year. And it all starts with the change in the jungle, Kanavi, doing Kanavi things out here in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think he has fully asserted himself now as the best jungler in the LPL this split, which, by the way, I think is a mantle that he's pretty damn familiar with.
Yeah, it's happened more than just this split. Let's just put it that way.
Most of his career, I feel like. My God, this guy.
Yeah, and again, another one where you can look at Fearless Draft and identify a player that has benefited from this type of change because of the not only how proficient he is on that champion pool, but how he can use that to punish his opponent, and where that then starts to restrict on them in themselves. Really thought this was a wonderful stretch here from top esports to show that this is where they belong. This is their power level within the LPL, and only in the LPL can you have a stretch like this where you can have an opportunity to power yourself up and jump up the power rankings this type of way.
And I think now, still, it's like half the split they had in a single week. So they're right there with JDG, who are going to be their next head-to-head matchup. I think they're at a very comparable power level now heading forward, and that's going to be absolute must-see stream when they do match up for a spot on the finals on the line. I know it seems crazy to just talk about all that and then still have BLG in the 5 spot, ahead of top esports. They just lost the head-to-head. We obviously are knocking them down. I don't think anyone's saying BLG was at their absolute best on the day, and that 10K, I feel like if they close out that game 3, BLG is winning this series themselves, probably in 4 games.
Yeah, it's such a significant thing that happens that you can envision the entire series pivoting around that if it wasn't in that situation. Isn't the world that we were living in. For Ben and the rest of the BLG fans, unfortunately, that is the world that we have to live in, where it is an unsatisfying and unsatisfactory performance from this team, from the champion contenders of the LPL. The world's finalists, T1 and BLG, shaking for vacation time instead of going to first strike. Pretty darn crazy to think about that, but when you look at the performances in this series, I think very much so. One of the worst that we have seen from Ben individually, as far as when you're tracking where he is and how he usually delivers in the LPL. This was certainly not it for him individually. And you can even go so and looking on this team and you're going, wow, do or die. Game 4, we've got the tank Galio in the mid lane, and wait, that can't be right. Tank Galio has the most damage on our team? I know it's Knight, guys, but come on, what's going on?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was the probably worst game out of Elk and Bin that you saw in that series, which is definitely playing into that. It was the best game for Jackie Love, and Cream far and away at his best series that he's had so far on this split. Now, he's had some duds before that, so easy to do. But ahead of BLG, Gen G, they get smacked around in Game 5, but they got to Game 5. They 3-0 D+, so they definitely get to, get some flowers and climb up a little bit. But we alluded to this at the first round of playoffs. Humble Life versus T1. We said at the end of this whole thing, T1 might still be the second best team in the LCK. And you know what? After seeing the playoff push, I think T1's still the second best team in the LCK.
I think at least there's a conversation or a showdown match that we got to get with Gen G for that conversation of that one before we just hand it over to T1, although my T1 fandom would love to just slide it over to the boys free. We are talking about Gen G, and I think the important thing to remember with this team as we move through the times and to our next event here, where they won't be representing the LCK due to that loss to Hanwha Life, is going to be looking at the strides that they made this split, because I think a lot of it is going to be instantly you had to figure it out, and the expectations, that still all is valid and gets that check mark. It is something that they have to be checked against. But when you do see this team and through these playoffs, I think one of the things is they did start to kind of figure it out a little bit more. They did start to look more so cohesive into that Gen G monster that you can imagine themselves powering up into, and what type of threats exist on that team. But the problem is something that I talked about and we laid out. That simply wasn't going to be enough. You had to hit the optimal form of Gen G and how you figure it out and how you utilize the threats that are on this team and the synergy, the hierarchy, who gets resources, all that type of stuff had to be figured out and run to a T, because you know what? The beast at the very top, the beast sitting of Hanwha Life is going to be there, and they will challenge you and push you all the way through. And with a champion, with a god in the top lane, Mr. Zeus coming on over, they have taken the crown of the LCK.
Yeah, and honestly, it doesn't really matter how the LPL finals play out. Hanwha Life are going to be the favorites heading into this first international event. That's how good that Game 5 gauntlet of back-to-back-to-back series that they ended up putting up were. But got to give a shout-out, of course, to Anyone's Legend who take over that 2 spot. And despite Hanwha Life being number 1, AL is the only team on this list, only major region team. They haven't dropped a series all year.
Oh, baby. Can't wait to see that streak and see if it can continue as we head towards that first strike event. I think it certainly is one of those ones where, yes, Hanwha Life is going to be that top seat, and I think there's almost nothing that could unseat them from that situation at this point until we get to that first strike event. That doesn't mean to say a potential matchup between Anyone's Legend and, say, Top Esports keeps this run through the lower bracket can't generate a type of excitement, type of heat, and type of reaction that can propel a type of contested conversation for that top seat of the Global Power Rankings.
At the very least, a competitive LPL finals, what it will do is showcase that, the LEC and LTA probably have no chance at this event. That's what it'll most likely show.
For a lot of people, you might not need that to come to that type of conclusion, but you know what? I think we're going to have a very fun first strike event, and it's going to be something we've never seen before as far as what we're rolling through and having the fearless draft aspect of it at the very least. Keeping an open mind for it and very excited looking at this power rankings, going through these teams and starting to get hungry for these showdowns that we have when we all meet internationally.
Let's just appreciate we're getting a mini MSI in March. 2 months ahead of schedule, you're getting some of these top teams, even if it's going to be a whirlwind 5-6 day tournament. The fact that we're getting it this early at all in fearless mode means it's a double thumbs up. We're suffering through the LTA format so that we can get an event like this, which hopefully makes it all worth it. But that is it today for League Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you. Absolute stunners. Thanks for hanging out as always. We'll catch you on that flippity flip.